All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to the second training in this series that's been made possible thanks to a grant from Massachusetts DEP. And we've been coordinating with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, the Ponset River Watershed Association, and then us at the Center for Watershed Protection to put together a series to flip forward. And this is to deliver live and on-demand trainings to the Massachusetts development community. And that's with the ultimate goal to increase the understanding of how to prevent stormwater pollution and design projects that comply with stormwater standards. So this on-demand training series will be available later this summer, and they'll be comprised of a lot of the content that's presented during these live trainings. So with the intention to incorporate feedback from participants. So we'll be grateful if you participate in a brief feedback survey that's going to pop up on your screen or in your browser at the completion of this training. And that feedback will helpfully guide us to make the on-demand trainings more effective for this community. So today's agenda, we're going to be doing a quick icebreaker. Then we're going to hear from Holly Jones from the town of Norwood, who's going to be speaking to us about site inspections and the perspectives of from the town of Norwood doing local inspections. Then we're going to hear from Carol Wong of the Center for Watershed Protection, who's going to be talking to us about best practices of erosion and sediment control during construction. And then lastly, from Bill Moynihan from Hatfield Construction. I apologize if I got your last name wrong, Bill. But he's going to speak to us about challenges faced on job sites. At the end, we're going to have some time for question and answer from all the speakers, but interdispersed between these talks, we'll have some short Q&As and then also a brief activity. So these segments, they will be recorded for that on-demand training series that I was speaking about earlier. So if you can make sure you're muted during these segments so that we can have clear recordings. And then during those Q&A times or the interactive activity, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, ask your question, or go ahead and use the chat box to post your questions. And we can use that as a jumping off point for the Q&A. So to start with our quick game. Actually, before the game, I want to launch a couple of poll questions to get an idea of who's participating today. So the first question is, here we go, launch the poll, is what type of organization are you affiliated with? Are you participating as a developer, engineer, or a site development consultant, maybe a construction contractor? Let's see, we're about 70% done. Give another 20 seconds. All right, it looks like a majority, a little over 50% are engineers or site development consultants. We've got a construction contractor with us, and then a good number of folks from government agencies and nonprofit. All right, the next question I'm going to ask is, how many people are participating from your location? I know some of you are just signing in on your own computer, but just to get an idea of how many people are actually participating today, I see there are some larger groups coming in. All right, so we've got 3 groups of 2 to 5, and we've also got a group of 6 to 10. So if you are from a small group participating, feel free to participate as a group. Put your questions in the chat box. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to meaningfully interact with our speakers today. All right, for our game. So we're going to be playing this game called Guess the Image. I'm showing you a zoomed in part of a picture. And if you could use the chat box to place some guesses. What do you think this is a zoomed in image of? Or at this point, you can feel free to come off mute. We're not going to be recording this for the on-demand trainings. All right, we've got some correct answers there. It's a fishing pole. All right, that was an easy one. I kind of gave you an easy one to start. All right, next one. Guess this image. What do you think this is a zoomed in image of? Oh, we got a quick one. Nikita, great job. All right. Gabriel, Julie. Yep, Squid Games. You got it. All right. Next one. Who can guess this image? And I know this is going to give some folks some nerdy cred. All right. Great. Looks like many of you got that one, Lord of the Rings. All right, guess this image. Any other guesses? All right, well, it looks like Gabriel, you get the prize for this one. It's a laser level. All right, next one. Guess this image. This is probably one of my favorites. Oh, great job. Yep, bubble tea or boba. All right. Now this one is kind of on theme for today. What can you guess what this image is? Nice. All right, great job. Yep, Gabion basket. And this is from a site in Baltimore, Maryland. And then this one, for those of you, actually, I'm not going to give away any hint. All right, what is this? This an image of? You got that one right, Holly. All right. Yep, that's mile a minute. I'm not going to even try to pronounce the scientific name for this species, but followed by the no. You got that one right, Holly. Okay, so thank you for participating in this game. We wanted to mix it up, give you a little bit of a fun jump before bringing in speakers who are going to talk to you about really exciting things today. And to start us off, we have Holly Jones. She's worked as the conservation agent for 5 years for the towns of Uxbridge, Massachusetts and Norwood, Massachusetts, and has served as a conservation commissioner for the city of Worcester. She has recently moved into working in planning and community development in Norwood. She has experience regulating and troubleshooting a wide range of development, from culvert replacements and dam removals to residential and industrial subdivisions, starting with initial planning and permitting to project closeout. Oh, Worcester. Thanks, Holly. I want to welcome Holly. She's going to speak to us today about site inspections, and we're going to follow that up with a brief Q&A. So I will stop sharing my screen so you can take it away, Holly.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me, and thanks for coming, everyone who is in the audience. I will pull up my PowerPoint. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation? Lovely. All right, so this is kind of a little bit of everything. And I just wanted to start with talking about, so I do a lot of inspections for erosion and sediment control compliance. And I wanted to start with sort of identifying some of the folks who might be out on your site doing that, and emphasizing that contractors are the first line of defense and the number one entity that should be doing frequent erosion and sediment control inspections to make sure that your site is in good working order. So I work as a conservation agent. Any projects that are near wetlands or other bodies of surface water are likely, definitely in Massachusetts, to be having inspections from conservation agents. Sometimes we see consultants out there. Maybe if you're building a subdivision, the town has a consulting engineer who's checking on things. Many towns in Massachusetts have designated stormwater authorities. That might be the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the DPW. It can vary. Your zoning enforcement officer is going to be on their site. They're not going to be mostly looking at erosion control, but if they see something, they'll likely say something. It's possible you could have the EPA out there if you have a NIPD's CGP that's needed when your site is more than an acre. And you may often also have the owner of the site out there as well. Certainly if I'm seeing problems, then I'm going to be, the owner is ultimately responsible for what happens on their site, and that's someone I would be talking to. So it's likely you'll have a number of intersecting permits, and we do all try and talk to each other. You know, if you have a permit for your septic with the health department, then I'll be chatting with them, with the planning board, sometimes even with the EPA. And we, for all of these regulators, our goal is to resolve problems before they start, if possible, or as soon as possible. And it's really when we see continued non-compliance that we start getting into penalties, which can get pretty serious, like this article I pulled for a Massachusetts developer. So I did just want to kind of start at the beginning. A lot of owners and even some contractors don't realize that there can be often a lengthy permitting process before you ever get to put a shovel in the ground. If you're going through a local board like the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, or for your state permits, sometimes you might need MIPA review. All of that can take several months. I've had projects before my boards as well that can take in excess of a year. And usually that's when we're sort of waiting on engineering changes between different revisions, and is unusual, but make sure that you plan to have sort of a healthy amount of time to get through that permitting process before you want to put shovels in the ground. And I do want to highlight that once you do, go to all the meetings, meet all of the requirements for your permit's going to be issued. That doesn't mean you can start right away. There's many requirements that are written into that permit even before you start construction. They might include things like an appeal period, recording the permit that was issued. In the case of a Conservation Commission, that would be your order of conditions. It's likely you'll have to have a pre-construction meeting or a pre-construction erosion and sediment control inspection. Provide contact info to your regulators for who their best contact on site is, and making sure that your site plans, your stormwater pollution and prevention plan, if you need one, or your order of conditions, if you need one, are available on site for reference. And I also wanted to mention too, it's pretty common that we do need as-built at the end of the project, and it's pretty common that little add-on portions of projects can get forgotten in the permitting process. But we do want to see everything on those plans that we're approving, even just a small deck or a patio or the outside egress stairs, all needs to be on there. So this is just an example of the cover letter that I send out when I issue an order of conditions. And it has all of these bullet points for things to take care of before you start work. So record your order, wait for the appeal period. You need a sign with your permit number. You need to let me know who is going to be monitoring erosion control on your site, whether there's a field engineer, and who the responsible parties are. So I know who to call when I want to schedule an inspection, or, you know, if I'm stopping by and see a problem. You want to make sure everyone on your site understands what the applicable conditions are. And I always go out and do an erosion and sediment control inspection before you start work. So the first thing you do is you put in, whether it's your silt sacks, your perimeter silt fence and straw wattles. And that's before even any cutting of vegetation, any grubbing that needs to be installed. And this is just the first page of the type of permit that the Conservation Commission's issue that I do inspections for, which is the order of conditions. And they often end up being many, many pages long. You might have a 20-page order of conditions. So I understand why folks don't read them, but I do recommend going through all of the conditions that are listed, highlighting any that seem like they're important or might get forgotten, and making sure that folks working on your site are familiar with what those are. Moving into once you've got your permits, you're ready to get started, your erosion control is in, and you've got the go ahead to start construction. This is the inspection report that I use during a construction period. It's straight from the EPA. So many folks will know if your site is in excess of 1 acre, you need to file for a construction general permit as part of the Clean Water Act. And that helps the EPA make sure that your construction area sediment and silt and so on isn't getting into wetlands and waterways. So I just stole their sheet wholesale, and this is really what I'm looking for and communicating with you about when I'm doing inspections. And this is available from the state. You can customize it for your site. And it's pretty easy to find. Many engineering companies will also have their own version of this, but they're all really looking for the same things. So just going into some greater detail about what I might be looking for on a site when I'm doing an inspection, I'll be looking at inactive areas of your site. Have they been stabilized? Are your natural resource areas protected? This might be the perimeter of your site, or it might be on the interior with a tree or maybe a stream running through your site. Are your waste receptacles contained? Perimeter controls are keyed in and maintained. Discharge points and receiving waters are free of sediment deposits. This might look like if you have a catch basin? Where is it, releasing to? And can we go and see what that looks like? You might have turbidity monitoring as part of your permit requirements. Storm drain inlets properly protected. I'll be looking at construction entrances and exits, trash and litter, washout facilities. So making sure you're not washing out your concrete into your storm drains and into your wetlands is a big one. If you have fueling, checking on that. Checking on contaminants, and then looking at non-stormwater discharges. If you're using wash water, if you're dewatering, maybe you're spraying for dust, maybe you're testing the fire hydrants on site and what's happening to that water, and is it potentially causing a problem? One thing that I want to emphasize is when we approve a permit, we really want everything that gets built to be the same as what we approved, except for your erosion and sediment control plans, which we really want to change with the needs of your project as needed. Your project is going to be always changing, and what you're going to need on site is also going to be always changing. You may be required to have extra erosion control materials on your site, but if you're not, it's still a great idea. Keeping extra silt fence, straw bales, riprap, whatever you may need to do a quick repair, a quick maybe second layer of erosion control to make sure that you're able to be quickly responsive to emerging problems or changes. Some examples of, things that I see often that might happen is you've been using one construction entrance that's properly protected, but for whatever reason, you need to go in through another way. And, by now, maybe you're mid-construction, you didn't get the rocks that you need, and so you just sort of open it up. Make sure your new entrances are stabilized. You're doing the perimeter controls around new places. Maybe there's a new source of water that you're adding to your site. And checking if you're dewatering, if you're doing anything like that, making sure that your controls are working. So are your silt sacks catching silt? Are they clogging? Is your filter bag leaking? Right, just doing all of those sort of routine checks to make sure everything is working the way you think it should. And we know that things can go wrong. Even the best laid plans can go awry, whether it's from unexpected bad weather or you hit a water main. Recently happened at a project in Norwood. And the best thing that you can do in those situations is respond to the problem as quickly as possible and let your regulators know as quickly as possible. All right, like I mentioned, we don't like surprises. We like clear and consistent communication. And so if we feel comfortable that we can trust you to address what's happening on your site, quickly and well, that means that we don't have to go into enforcement mode, which nobody likes. So I wanted to sort of end with just some fun photos from Norwood. This is a photo of a recent wetlands violation that happened because of a catch basin several hundred feet away from the wetland, and the catch basins close to the wetland were actually extremely well protected. That's the one on the left. So I saw the wetlands violation first and then had to sort of backtrack and find out where all of this sediment was coming from. And went to the site on the left first and quickly realized that it wasn't possibly coming from this site, and actually several hundred feet away from the first construction site I went to was another construction site that wasn't being regulated at that time by an order of conditions or by a NIPD's CGP. So they didn't have a SWIP and they weren't doing the inspections that the first site was. So they did still have some best practices. They put a silt sack, in their basin, but they had some stockpiles that weren't contained, and you can see their silt sack is actually not what's happening here. When I looked at it, is I found that the water was flowing underneath the silt sack rather than through it, because I looked at that and thought, why isn't that silt sack getting clogged and full of water, which the folks working on the site had sort of not looked at it. Sort of asking those questions is important. And I wanted to show a few more. This is again somewhere that just sort of going through, we had somewhere that did have a construction entrance, but still was having tracking really from, I think, other areas on the site outside of the main construction area that were just smaller contributors of sediment. And the middle photo is somewhere where they were spraying for dust. And what I found on that site, and it was a large site of several acres, is that every single catch basin was protected except for the one that the water was flowing into. So that sort of, again, emphasizes when I'm on the site, I'm going to be looking closely at where your water is going, and what's in it, and how you're protecting specifically where the water is flowing on your site. And then the last one I thought was interesting. I threw this photo in just because I thought it was a really well protected catch basin, but looking at it, I could tell right, there's this white residue around it. And so it seemed like they were maybe doing some concrete washout that was getting discharged into that catch basin. So that's maybe the lesson, is that your BMPs aren't sufficient if you're going to be not doing source control on your site as well. So not discharging contaminated things into your catch basins, and making sure that the water that is flowing across your site and into catch basins or into resource areas is as clean as possible. And then a couple more I wanted to end with, just showing a couple sites where both are sort of large areas. So one of the biggest problems that we see is when a large area is disturbed at once, and it's hard to control water flowing across your very large disturbed site. So phasing can often be important, as well as stabilizing as you go. And sometimes that's just, I know that that contractors have trouble with that because you're renting equipment for short periods of time and you need to get everything done at once. But good planning can really make a big difference as well. So I wanted to just point out on the left, they disturbed a large area at one time, but they went through and roughened the surface so that at each of these sort of like wheel ridges, water is getting caught before flowing to the next one. They had their perimeter controls in place and they quickly stabilized with seed. I think a tackifier was used here as well, although I'm not 100% sure. And then at the site on the left, all of those things sort of still need to happen. There's no erosion controls. You know, maybe they did dig this channel, but there's no, you know, maybe we would want to see check dams or something like that in the channel to catch some of this silt. And there, it wasn't sort of quickly seeded or tackified. So a lot of those things can really help when you have to go ahead and do that kind of grubbing on a large area, which is not recommended. And then the last thing I wanted to mention as a regulator is that it's so important to close out your permits with us once you finish your project. For the orders of conditions that the Conservation Commission issues, those orders are recorded on deeds, which means that it may be harder to sell the house, whether you're, or whatever the property is, whether you're selling it or whether it's somebody else's property and they're not going to find out that they have this cloud on their deed until 20 years down the road. Either way, it's really important to wrap that up so that you don't sort of find out too late that there's still work to do before you can close it out. One thing that we get a lot is, oh, I need a certificate of compliance today because I'm closing on this house tomorrow, or the opposite of, oh, this project was completed in 2004 and we never got a certificate of compliance. The engineering firm that designed it has closed. It's much more difficult to get an as-built now. And we run into those sorts of issues quite a bit as well. So there might be situations where you have to wait before you can close out a project. Wetland replications, we require 2 years or sometimes 3 years, or the state, if you have an order of conditions from the state, they often require 5 years of showing that you've successfully created that wetland replication. But as soon as you can close out your project, please do so. And so we'll come out once you submit everything, which includes an as-built, usually a letter from a professional stating that everything was built in compliance with the approved site plans. We'll go out and do an inspection to just confirm that as well. You know, and oftentimes that inspection is when I see sort of, you know, I mentioned at the outset, including your porches and so on. And, you know, maybe you'll find on the inspection, you stayed the right distance away from the wetland with the house, and then you built an extra porch that was too close and, you know, now has to, you know, hopefully not be removed, but sometimes. So that's why we want to see everything at the outset and have that ongoing communication. But we do an inspection to make sure what was built was what was approved, and to make sure everything is stabilized, which the required amount is 75% stabilized. So if there's a a patch of ground, that doesn't have the grass in yet here or there, we have some discretion. And I wanted to mention as well that your planning permits or your conservation permits can sometimes hold up not just closings, but also occupancy certificates. I think that's all I've got for you all. So
Thank you, Holly. Yeah, this is a great time for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions for Holly? Feel free to come off mute and ask your question or post it in the chat box. And we do have some comments that there is some appreciation for your examples, Holly.
great.
All right, any questions? All right, well, Holly went through a lot of material, so take some time to process, and we will open it up for more questions at the end of the training. So if you think of any questions for Holly, you'll have time to ask. So I will take the time to introduce our next speaker. So next we'll be hearing from Carol Wong, who graduated with her BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Maryland and her master's in environmental engineering from Stanford University. She's been a water resources engineer with the Center for Watershed Protection for 8 years. Some projects Carol works on include stormwater research, stormwater guidebook development, BMP design and permitting, plan review, water quality monitoring, our clean water certificate training program, and construction inspection. So she's going to be presenting some best practices of erosion and sediment control during construction. All right.
Thanks, Lee. Let me share my screen. Oh, I did this backwards, but that's okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Lee. And so Holly did a great job of kind of coming at it from the inspector's point of view. And so my presentation is going to mostly be noticing the big compliance issues that we've seen and on construction sites, and kind of going through some of those examples that we see a lot, and the top compliance issues. Okay. Let me grab my pointer. Okay, so the first problem, I think Holly did mention this as well, it's not phasing your grading. So phasing is that you only open up a portion of your site at a time, and this, for really large sites, phasing is important, but also really steep slopes or highly erodible soils. It's good to kind of go at a portion at a time, and obviously the scale of it depends on how big your project is. And then stabilizing the area that you're not working on within 14 days really does help with decreasing the amount of erosion. And then once you're done with the area and it's finished, finished grading and whatnot, is to stabilize with permanent cover within 14 days to kind of really finish off your site and decrease the chance and potential for erosion. And so here's a picture of a site that, when I went on this site, it was obvious that this area was not being used. It was used a little bit for storage, but it had been a really long time. They obviously cleared and grubbed it a while ago, but this whole section was just kind of bare for the majority of the time. And so, they could have waited to clear it. And there's different situations, and every construction site's a little bit different as to why they decided to do certain things. But it basically was like the place to put the porta potty. Was the only time that I ever saw this section being used. So let's see. So some examples of good stabilization is just matting and seeding, This is your erosion control blankets, and then hydroseeding is also a quick one that you can use to stabilize your area. The second problem is incorrect erosion and sediment control. So this picture is an example of sediment control without erosion control. And the first thing we want to do is prevent erosion from happening, right? Sediment is going to come off your site because it's a construction site. Sediment control is really when you open up a site and you can't keep it stabilized, ways to prevent that sediment from leaving the site. But when you can, you want to prevent erosion from even happening, right? The side of this, this hill here was not going to be dug up anytime soon. Basically the flat area on top was they filled this in to create a flat area on top. I think it was going to be a parking lot. So this side slope was going to be there. And it had been a very long time. You can kind of see by all these rails that, it wasn't stabilized, or maybe it was attempted, but the seed didn't stay. And so, the grass, the partial grass here doesn't count as stabilized because, I think the term, different jurisdictions have different rules, but about 95% coverage is when it's considered stabilized. And it's because, that this is, I say like 30%, less than that. And the problem is that any destabilized area, so any area without any cover, is going to erode, and it's going to erode away and eat away at the part that is stabilized. And so it was really important. They should have, reseeded that area, probably maybe like regraded it to stop that erosion happening. And because they do have a silt fence here, but that silt fence, you're going to require so much more maintenance because this area isn't stabilized. And vegetative cover is like the cheapest, most efficient way to decrease the amount of erosion happening on your site. And they just did not go back and fix this area. So I'll just have some more pictures of incorrect erosion sediment control. This one, well, there could have been a ton of reasons why this happened. It could be that that's what was on the plans. The engineer didn't realize what kind of catch basin this was, and they said put a filter log over it, and the contractor followed the rules. Or the contractor just wasn't trained, and the foreman told them, cover the inlet, and they've seen it done this way. That's what they think it is, right? So this kind of shows us multiple issues. One, that the people in the field don't really understand the purpose of these things, right? Obviously, you have a job, but explaining to them why, what this log is actually doing is a really important piece of it to make sure that they understand how to fix a potential problem that might be different on paper, than it is on site. Here's another one. This is not how you connect two different pieces of silt fence. Again, probably a training issue that people didn't know the proper way to do this, right? And also, if you truly understood what the purpose of silt fence was, you wouldn't have done this, right? There's obviously going to be like a hole underneath between the two fences where water could go through. It's supposed to be a barrier for water to filter through the silt fence before it goes to the other side. So, there's a little bit of training that probably was necessary for this situation. Problem number 3, poor management of stockpiles. So temporary stockpiles should be stabilized with seed or other covers like a tarp. It should have a sediment control around it, like a silt fence. And then you should be placed in appropriate areas. I think that one is one that people don't think of as much. So this example is that it's on a paved surface, which is not ideal. And some places don't allow it, but some places do, because there is silt fence on pavement is a spec that some people use. And then you shouldn't be adjacent to a stream, which makes sense, or a storm drain. Don't put these right next to a storm drain, because all that's going to do is, if you have, inlet protection, it's going to clog your inlet protection really, really quickly. And then either you're going to have to maintain it all the time, or you're not going to maintain it and you're just going to flood out your site. Or the guy maintaining it's just going to poke some holes in your inlet protection because your site's not draining. So there's a lot of reasons why you don't want to include these near your storm drains. And one of the other one that I think people don't think about as much is that it shouldn't be near concentrated flow. So this site water flows towards those greenish containers through this valley gutter, right? So what's going to happen if it rains really hard is that it's going to rain, it's going to pile up into here, right? Water's supposed to go into here from the parking lot outside of this picture. And it's just going to run straight into your stockpile and erode all of that away downstream to your next inlet. And so just being smart about this really just helps save you time, as a contractor, saves them time, so that you don't have to keep maintaining it and you're not losing your stockpile either. Here's another example of BMP maintenance. You know, even if the best BMP could be installed, if you're not inspecting it and maintaining it, it's not going to work properly. So this is a filter bag that probably got clogged and probably needed a new one. And you know, the contractor, instead of maintaining it, they're like, oh, my pump isn't able to pump through the filter bag because it's clogged. I'm just going to poke some holes in it so that the water can leave. Right, that obviously defeats the purpose of this filter bag. And you can see, right, the point of a filter bag is to filter out the sediment before you release it. But look at how much sediment you're releasing your water into, probably because all that sediment is coming out of your water. You should really inspect daily and after rain storms, definitely after rain. Here's an example, and I think it's like actively raining in this picture. So, you know, it's a little hard to see, but, you know, this probably was already filled up fairly high on that silt fence before this rain happened. And, you know, sometimes it just rains a ton and it's really hard to control. And I think erosion sediment control is typically designed for like a 2-year storm. So those really big storms, yeah, you know, you can't stop everything. But in this situation, this silt fence was not, there was not enough room above the silt fence to really hold in even a tiny storm. And I think that they were grading the dirt into the silt fence so that, you know, it was even less space to allow for water to filter through. So really should check to make sure that they are, they have the capacity to hold the water that's going to come. Just another example of, you know, likely erosion from upstream, just kind of clogged this inlet. And, you know, that's not, water is just going to end up ponding right there because it can no longer filter through, right? In every catch basin, we're not covering the catch basin completely so that water can't get through. There should still be some, we just want to filter the water before it goes into the inlet. And in this situation, water might be able to go through these holes. But there's just way too much sediment on here for it to really efficiently work properly. Problem number 5, no stabilized construction entrance. I think Holly talked on this point. When a vehicle leaves the site, it should roll over some stone pads, like a stabilized construction entrance. You could also include wash racks or have washing stations before vehicles leave the site. And mud on the road is the #1 complaint on construction sites, so it's just something that you should be aware of. And here's an example of a really nice, you know, construction entrance. They have these fences so that you can only enter in this one direction, right? Sometimes you have a stabilized construction entrance and then, you know, a contractor might go like, you know, 10, 20 feet down the road and drive off and not over your stabilized construction entrance. So this really only allows your vehicle to travel into the site through one entrance. The rock is clean. You know, stabilized construction entrances don't last for forever. It doesn't last for your whole, well, it depends on your project, but it might not last for your whole project time. And once it gets clogged and it isn't able to kind of shake off the dirt and get into the tires to get the dirt off, you should replace the dirt. Okay. Problem number 6, dewatering and other pollutant discharges. So you should never dewater directly into a stream or dewater into unstable soils. So like steep slopes into erodible soils. You really should try to find a flat and grassy area where you're dewatering into a filter bag or into a sediment track or sediment basin to allow some of that sediment to fall out or be filtered out before you release it into off your site, basically. because things like this will happen. And this is this photo is from a community member that ended up with a stop work order issued because of this amount of sediment coming off of their construction site. Problem number 7 is no inlet protection. There are situations where, this picture might happen and it's okay. Very rarely, right? Let's just say you're replacing that inlet, right? You can't protect it if you're going to replace it soon. Or that sometimes inlets are connected to sediment basins before the sites officially, went during construction. And so, some people don't protect their new inlets because it's all of that's going into a sediment basin. But in most situations, you want to protect your inlets. You want to, because that's where water is potentially leaving your site that is not clean and not filtered. And so here's another, this one might actually fit better in the wrong erosion sediment control section, but this inlet is covered. It kind of looks like a filter log. I don't know if the picture is close enough to see, but they're not filter logs. That's a pipe, a corrugated pipe. And so, whether it's the contractor just didn't have filter logs and they're like, this looks close enough. I don't know what the situation was, but obviously this is not a proper inlet protection, because water is the unfiltered water is just gonna flow right into the gap that's existing here. Problem number 8 is not protecting the site. Really, this issue can start from the plan review side, delineating and making sure that your natural resources are delineated correctly is, really important. But then the contractor actually delineating and making sure that they're protecting the areas is also the next step. Protecting areas like wetlands and forested areas and streams. Another issue that kind of is in line with that is, you might have delineated your area, but then if the contractor doesn't stay within their LOD, their limit of disturbance, then that can cause problems as well, right? The LOD is there for a reason, because, in the planning phase, they planned to protect these areas, so you can't, roll your excavator over those areas. And then one other one that's like a little bit different from the rest of this presentation is you should not compact soils if that area is meant for infiltrating stormwater control measures. So for example, if you're putting in an infiltration trench or a bioretention, it shouldn't be along the main path of your construction site where your excavator is rolling over and over again. Because the whole point of that area typically is for infiltration. So I've seen some contractors put silt fence around where your infiltrating practice, like just say permeable pavement, is going to be, so you're not compacting that subsurface soils. So an example of some protected areas. This one, there is I think that's a super silt fence protecting these trees over here. And it's working very nicely. And it's super silt fence is great for, steeper areas, for larger drainage areas, for highly erodible soils and all of those things. And then we have our tree protection fence around them. They didn't have, I shouldn't say they didn't have to, they probably did on the plans, but even though an excavator can't go to the other side, they still put on fence, right? Saying these are trees that are to be protected, and make sure you're careful and your excavator bucket doesn't hit the branches. So this is a great example of a protected area. And then a lot of times on your plans, there will be designated areas that are protected, and it's kind of, you start there and look to see and make sure that you are delineating on site, fencing off the correct areas. And so sometimes it will look like this. This is as forest retention area. So on the other side there, I think it was a forested area, and also there was a wetland on the other side as well. So that's it. Are there any questions?
right, feel free to come off mute, ask Carol a question, or place a question in the chat box. And we do have a comment, another round of awesome pictures. And I agree, those are some really great examples, Carol. Okay, well, no other questions popping up right now. I'm going to, Carol, did you have a brief activity that you wanted to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. So now I'm going to test you all about your erosion sediment control knowledge. And so next I'm going to show some pictures, and you guys can unmute or put in the chat box what you see. We can just start off with like, what issues do you see in these pictures? So here we go. What would you do differently? What would you suggest? What is wrong? Yeah, silt fence not towed in. Yep. Yes, exactly. Yeah, thanks, Deb. Silt fence going the wrong direction. So I'll just start with each one. So silt fence not towed in, you really should have to key in or tow in your silt fence at the bottom. So in almost, I think every single, spec of the silt fence, it tells you to dig a hole, stick the silt fence over, and then put the dirt back on top so that water, so if it were in the right direction, right, when it rains, the water is just going to slip up underneath of it, right? The whole point of a silt fence isn't to hold that rock in place. It's just prevent dirty water from leaving your site. So if the water can just sneak underneath, it's not working correctly. And silt fence, yeah, silt fence should be placed on the contour, right? So right now it's perpendicular to the contour. It should be placed like this way. Right. So it's not the proper use of silt fence because it's basically like, it's meant to create almost like a sheet flow of water leaving your site. Water is not really going to like move sideways like that. And what's going to end up happening if it were, I think the silt fence eventually goes flat this way. All the water is just going to kind of puddle up on this side. It's not going to, very unlikely, unless it's backed up, going to come onto the edges. Silt fence appear to be bulging out, being used to contain those rocks. Yeah, I feel like they just misused silt fence, but silt fence is not a good practice to use in rocky areas. There are other things you can use. Unless you are underneath of that rock, it's just not, it's very hard. It's very hard to put silt fence under rock. And so it's not the best option for your erosion sediment control. Let's see. No additional ESC below erosion control blanket on steep slopes. Yeah, like right over here. Let's see. The erosion control blanket isn't covering the whole area or attached, and also sort of looks like it won't work for that steep slope. Yep, maybe riprap or rock armoring is needed. Yeah. Yeah, this is just kind of plopped on is what it looks like. That is correct that like this steep area isn't really going to, this matting, if it like, what it is picture if it's raining, like what is this matting going to do? Not much. Yeah, great. Was there anything else? I think that was mostly it. All right, next picture. What do we see here? So this is obviously an inlet. Do we think that this would work properly? Gappage, yeah. Yep. So, if this corner of the picture was covered, you're like, oh, that could work. But what I think is most likely happening here is that the water wasn't leaving. So the contractor went, I'm just going to push this aside so water will, I would stop flooding out my area. Because what we can see is that filter fabric or geotextile needs to be replaced. It's clogged. It's not, your inlet protection is not meant to be a one-time deal, like put it down and you're good for the rest of your construction project. You do have to maintain it. You do have to go in and replace it. And so, making sure you go back and remove these and replace it with a clean sheet is really important so that you don't have to do this. All right, I think this might be one of my last pictures. What do we see here? If it wasn't draining and they needed it to drain, what should they have done in that situation? That's a good question. I don't know what they have available on site. I don't know if Holly can answer that question better than I can. Or someone else.
I think you were spot on with saying that they needed to replace that filter fabric. It looked like the filter fabric this is sort of getting nitpicky, but it may have been a felted filter fabric, where a woven fabric is going to be a little bit more effective at allowing water to drain through without clogging quite as quickly. But really, that replacement that you recommended would have been what I would have done. If they needed to, if you don't have more fabric on your site, maybe consider what you do have that you could use to protect that inlet. So can you surround it with gravel? Can you surround it with that's maybe what I would do is surround that catch basin with straw bales or with gravel. If I sort of misjudged and didn't have replacement silt sacks or sort of the first BMP on site.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good thing that I forgot to talk about is in a storm, really big storms, like really hard to handle, but there is no, and it's hard to say, right? This is a snapshot of one moment of this construction, so we can guess at what they were doing, but it seemed like there might not have been a sandbag around on this side when it rained, and so the sediment was able to enter into your filter fabric, right? The idea is that these sandbags are here to help stop some of that sediment on the outside of the sandbag. And then anything that gets past that sandbag then has to be filtered through the filter fabric. So if you're not preventing that first big glug of dirt from going into your filter fabric, then yeah, it's going to clog very quickly. But you want this sandbag to be really snug up next to that curb to ensure that water, as much water as possible, is not just directly entering it, and that it's hitting that filter bag first, settling out, because you can see some of that sediment settling out, but some of it just settled into your filter fabric. And so I think that these situations don't happen as frequently if the erosion sediment control was working or was properly maintained beforehand. Okay. All right, last picture. What do we see here? There's a lot going on in this picture. I'll read this. Deb said, also looks like this inlet control is on a paved area, maybe supplement with street sweeping or other prevention methods to keep sediment away from catch basins to begin with. Thanks, Deb.
Sorry, that was on the previous one.
Yeah. All right, so this one, I had shown some pictures of this site. It was funny because we weren't there. I wasn't here to be an inspector. I was here to do a stream training. And the stream just happened. It was down in here. It was our stream training, and we just happened to show up. And I was like, oh gosh, this needs some help. It had rained, I wouldn't say within the last week, but but within the last month. So it kind of was like, okay, but it definitely was way too long to have this happening and seeing this issue. And it was funny because once we showed up on site, the contractors, I don't know if they knew who we were. I don't think they did. Everyone was taking pictures of this because everyone knows, like, this doesn't look right. And like immediately, like 30 minutes later, there was some guy with a shovel trying to clean up this site. First of all, a shovel would take you very long to fix this, but they knew that this needed to be fixed. They just hadn't gotten to it yet. So when this picture doesn't show it very well, I was trying to show it in this. So this, this is looking towards the fence, and I'm like standing here taking this lower picture. So it's actually a really steep slope coming from here into this silt fence. So the issue was that this hill, water running down, kind of ran along this silt fence, and then at the lowest point, it just spurted out, right? So again, this fence kind of functioned as a diversion, filtering, but diverting the water and protecting this side over here. But what ended up happening was that it concentrated the flow into like two specific areas that ended up breaching the super silt fence. And so, they needed to come back and put the fence back up and remove all of that sediment that accumulated in here. And unfortunately, this area where all this is happening this is the protected area, right? This silt fence was supposed to be protecting the downstream side because I think there was a wetland down here. So obviously this is not working. And maybe more stronger measures should have been put up. It wasn't the best design because you're concentrating flow, and silt fence is not good for concentrated flow. There are other options, well, not to concentrate the flow into it is one of them, but this could have been designed a little bit better to withstand kind of the flow out of this site. Are they using cyclone fencing to reinforce silt fence? I don't know what that is. Holly, do you?
Yeah, it just looks like there's that metal fencing material with the metal poles behind the silt fence. So it looks like they understood the force of water in some way by reinforcing it. Yeah.
So this is, I don't know if this exists in Massachusetts, but in the Maryland area, for us, it's called super silt fence. And so there are rules on, slope, distance on what a super silt fence can take on. It was way too much. This flow, the length of flow and the grade of flow was too much for even this kind of silt fence. So yeah. Wire backed silt fence. Require this on conservation permits now. Great. Yeah. And if Massachusetts might not have revised their ESD in a while. So but other jurisdictions have a ton of rules on, when best to use this and in what situations and where, you might need another silt fence. They probably should have done some sort of stopping that flow from concentrating on this pathway down to begin with. There's a ton of different things they could have done, but they kind of just picked the easiest one, which is silt fence, to do. And I think that, there's a lot of things that were happening at the site, but I'm just going to stop there because I think I'm out of time. Lee?
Yeah, we'll move on to the next speaker, and then there will be some time at the end of the training, hopefully, to answer some questions, or you'll be able to reach out to Carol or Holly directly. But I will introduce our last speaker for the day. So next, we're going to be hearing from Bill Moynihan from Hatfield Construction. He's going to be talking to us on the challenges faced on job sites. Bill is the Director of Operations at Hatfield Construction. They are a site work contractor working in the residential, commercial, and institutional fields, focusing on utilities, infrastructure, stormwater management, site restoration, structure or site of excavation, structural concrete, paving, and accessibility. So, Bill, I believe you don't have a PowerPoint today?
No, I do not. Just gonna run through things quickly, just more or less how we tackle a project on our end and kind of the things we see and don't see. You guys covered a lot of the, the beginning stages, a lot of issues you find or problems, concerns. Some of the biggest stuff for us is when we start a project, basically figuring out who's responsible for all the permitting. Whether we're a subcontractor for a GC or we are the GC ourselves, just hashing out with the owners, the regulators, the cities, towns, federal, whoever it may be, who's responsible at the end of the day for basically all the paperwork, who's watching the site at all times. A lot of the time we'll go in there and start a project and leave for months on end. And the GC is more or less going to be responsible for, the oversight of the project. Ultimately, we're responsible for our erosion controls if we install them. A big one is if we're the GC and we have subcontractors, our subcontractor agreements tie directly to the order of conditions or the permitting or anything involved in that, to hold them responsible. If you have well drilling, geothermal, electrical contractors, anything like that, that's you're not in control of their activities. You want to make sure that they're aware of what needs to be met all around. So we try to include that in all of our commitment language with them or anything like that. As soon as we have a project started, we typically have a site super who we review on site prior to the start of any work with all parties, their contact info shared throughout for any issues, communication, documents, photos, anything like that. Once everything's agreed on, typically erosion's installed, like has been mentioned, inspected, then we begin our work. Prior to breaking ground, we try to phase our project to the best of our ability, although things change quite often, in order to not open the entire site, but selectively choose which areas are opened at which times, which areas shouldn't be traveled on for future rain gardens or bioretention areas. So basically this person is the one that's communicating, the one that's doing the inspections weekly or bi-weekly, whatever agreement is arranged. And we like to sort of create an email chain or through Procore or whatever and do weekly or bi-weekly just reports, updates on what erosion we changed, suggestions we have, what issues came, and just distribute that throughout. So everyone's aware of what's happening, the next stage in the project. It keeps everybody at ease. As Holly mentioned, it's nice to have communication. They feel better about the project. They're not worried about it. Prior to rain events, we try to, forecast what's coming, explain what we're doing to get ahead of that. Always have additional erosion control items or materials on site for whatever may come, because the weather is unpredictable no matter what you're looking at. So it's a big piece to keep them involved with the owners just throughout the entire thing. And at the end of the day, whoever's installing it, subcontractors, it all lands on them. So they're the one reviewing their work and just confirming everything's functioning properly. Especially changes, like they mentioned, different entrances to the site. That happens almost on every project. It's inevitable, especially when you have 10 to 15 subcontractors working in the same area you're trying to work. You need to make everybody happy, but you also have to play by the rules. So it's notifying people, putting in a proper entrance, maintaining it, closing that entrance out, stabilizing it before you move on to the next, so you don't have multiple entrances, is a big part of that. Let's see what else we had on here. So basically, you work through the project, we tackle what comes, we try to phase everything accordingly. As we push towards the end of it, making sure we're stabilizing our way out, or if we're going to be leaving for 3 months or so while they build the building, or lead time on materials, making sure that we either stabilize the entire site before we leave, or we keep the area to be worked in and watch it bi-weekly. We'll still check in regardless if the GC is doing their own inspection reports. I still like to be involved because they're pointing the finger at us regardless if we're there or not. As far as tracking pads, that's a huge one when we leave. Those get used constantly. So whether we gotta turn the material over, replace the material, we try to keep an eye on that. We typically have a sweeper, dust control on every site, just to, after every rain event, go through and tackle any issues that happen. When there is an issue after a rain event, we try to notify everyone prior to them coming out and seeing it without knowing that it happened, or there was an issue and we fixed it, put it back together, try to show what happened, what we did to fix it, and what it looks like now. It's better off that way. They should know it's part of it. It's going to happen. It's inevitable to have a perfect site in most scenarios. So there are those accidents, or it wasn't designed for the amount of flow, stuff like that. When we get towards the end of the project, that's always a fun part, like you talked about, trying to close the permit out. Our work may be done and the project may continue for months before it's, they're looking for a occupancy permit or anything like that. So we tend to leave our erosion control in, even if it is established. It helps just to make me feel better at the end of the day, typically the owners. And then when we're at that stage, we'll remove it, stabilize those areas. A lot of guys will remove their erosion control and not stabilize the areas where the erosion control was. So that's another big piece that should get addressed, because some of the erosion controls can be significant, or sediment controls. And then as far as inspection reports go, typically you got to retain that information for 3 years after the project. It might be more, might be less, but we file everything. We use a system called Procore. So we'll give that to the owners or the GC along with as-builts, and we try to keep and retain that information just for any future issues that occur, or they ask for that information. At least you have it. You're not scrambling to generate it or tell them you threw it out or something like that. As-builts, like I mentioned, those are critical. Typically, we're passing along our information to the engineer who puts a more formal as-built together. That's a requirement on almost every project. So that's something we pay close attention to, especially changes. Sometimes they try to use the original plan, but there's additional drains or structures or modifications, elevation changes, everything that needs to be kind of kept track of at the end of the day. So we attempt to stay up on all that and communicate with everyone. A big one we deal with is tree protection. All the colleges are very specific on that, tree and vegetation. Typically the engineer does a very good job of plans to protect them. We go above and beyond that because trees are critical to most owners, and especially colleges and cities. So root protection, root compaction, stuff like that is huge, because you won't see the effects of that for years to come. So yeah, that's basically an outline of how we handle it. The biggest thing is communication in our eyes, and sticking one person to really handle all of the communication, inspections, documentation. So there's not finger pointing to owners, GCs, anything that may interrupt that. But aside from that, we've had good luck. I mean, there are situations where there's problems and issues, but as long as you address them and communicate, we seem to, work well with pretty much everyone we've had projects on that involve this. So that would be my best piece to give at the end of it, is communication.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? And I'm going to open it up to all three speakers, Bill, Holly, and Carol, to answer questions. So feel free to post your question in the chat box, or ask your question, come off mute, ask your question. We'd love to, we're here to bring a resource to you. Carol, Holly, and Bill all have different perspectives around construction and erosion sediment control. And so it's a great time to ask your questions. All right, we have a question from Deb. Bill, do you have any good tips for contractors during the bidding process? For example, to account for changes or ensure that they have enough budget to keep up with practices throughout the construction process?
That's a tough question. I mean, private jobs, it's a little easier. It puts you in a tough position when it's a competitively bid project. So you're typically bidding to be the low bidder and to produce a product that's, great. So if they outline an erosion control plan, you're bidding that plan. Obviously you have to factor in a percentage, but we typically try to, most of the time we eat the costs associated with repairs or additional erosion. Sometimes you have the opportunity for a change order or, a design change, but a lot of the time the verbiage in the contract puts all the responsibility on you. So you get into the process of quality versus low bidder. So we just meet what we need to do everything right, whether we have to eat a little bit of it or not.
Deb, did you have a follow-up?
No, I just want to say thanks.
Okay. Next question comes from Angela, and this, I'm assuming it might be for Holly, but it could also be for some of the other folks from local municipalities. Do you require all erosion sediment control inspectors to complete the new EPA training under the CGP? I hope someone knows what CGP means. Maybe
CGP is the construction general permit. So that's the NIPD's permit you get for opening more than an acre of construction. I have not required that training before, but I think it's worth looking into. I have required other credentials for certain projects before. So there's certified erosion and sediment control inspectors and various other credentials that are available for more complex projects, or if you're dealing with sort of a major violation that I have conditioned as a requirement in the past.
Yeah, because EPA now requires it under the construction general permit, so you had to go and essentially take the training and pass their exam and get their certificate in order to officially do SWIPs under the EPA permit. So I just wasn't sure. I think that's something that not that many people are aware of. And when you do site inspections, if you go and check their folder in the trailer and look at like their SWIPs to make sure that whoever's doing it has that there, because then they're not even in compliance with the EPA permit. And just throwing that out there.
That's a good point. Thanks.
Is this something that other municipalities, I know that we've got a few representatives on the call today. Does anyone else want to respond about your inspections? All right.
I mean, I took the training myself and just got the permit or the certificate anyway, because it was really easy. But yeah, I think that, and I know Holly, when you were presenting, you used the EPA form for your inspection, so.
Right. And that's about a 5-hour training, right? It's pretty
Honestly,
quick.
I just took the exam.
There you go.
Because you have the option to just take the exam, and if you've been doing it enough, you know, the only thing is the new dewatering requirements that they added on, that if you just read up briefly on it, you'll pass it. But yeah, I didn't actually do the training. I just took the exam and got the certificate. Which
Okay.
should be easy if you do this on a regular. And then one other thing I was gonna add is what I do. I use I did everything digital. So I use the ARC Survey 123 app for my inspections. It allows it to be tracked easier, and we have in town permitized permitting software across departments. So doing it that way on the tablet and then uploading the document allows more sort of consistency and able to track stuff. And
Yeah, and that's great for contractors too, I think, who are doing inspections, because it's so easy to share out with folks like you and I.
And it'll even allow you to like take the same picture in like the same exact spot, like it'll line it up. So you, if you have like a violation area, it'll line up the picture of where kind of you were standing around, and then it'll tell you, so you can like take the same sort of spot size picture and see how the violation area is progressing.
Thank you, Angela. Do you mind posting that in the chat box? We have 1 minute left, so.
Wait, post what the
Oh, the tool, the ARC 123 tool,
yeah.
like a link to yeah, that app. All right, and I just wanted to make sure folks on the call today know that there are 2 other trainings coming up tomorrow and Friday. I posted the topics and the registration links in the chat box. But if you'd like to join us to learn a little bit more about some design solutions, and then also some post-construction operation and maintenance case studies, then join us tomorrow and Friday for that information. And then I also wanted to share the contact information for the speakers today. So if you would like to reach out to them, if you have any questions, I hope they'd be happy to respond, but I want to thank our speakers for sharing their experience with us today, and also thank all of you for joining us. And again, the funding that has made it possible for us to pull together these resources for you all. All right, I hope everyone has a nice afternoon, and thank you for joining us, and please share with the registration link with colleagues that you think might find this information useful. And then once the on-demand series comes out and you want to revisit any of this content, that will also be available for you and your colleagues. So thank you and goodbye.